because I wish that someone like me had been public when I was 13 years old. I wish that there had been more information about the vocal effects and singing and, just the side effects that I experienced in general. Also, I want to give people hope who have detransitioned. Like the affirmation is kind of the root of the problem, right? And that's kind of what happened to me when I first stumbled across this website.
All right, Kat, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Laura.
So, you have a very interesting topic. Why don't I let you just take it away and you can let me know where you want to start with it all?
Okay, sounds good. So, most people know me as a detransitioner or someone who identified as transgender and then decided to reverse the process at some point. But the beginning of my story, I was born in a small town in California. I was born into a very musical family. Both of my parents were professional musicians at one point. And, I was very artistic, very like nerdy as a kid too. I really loved math and science, and I ended up getting a science degree, in my adulthood, molecular biology. But, I had some difficulty as a child. I don't have a confirmed diagnosis, but I believe that I could possibly be autistic. And I had trouble making friends and fitting in with like the other kids at school. I was also an only child, so that was part of it as well, as I didn't have that like practice socializing with my siblings at home. And my mom worked a lot and went to school when I was a kid, so it was mostly my dad that raised me, and I feel like we both kind of have the same stubbornness and introvertedness. And so, sometimes we would kind of butt heads. And, but, both of my parents loved me and everything. And I think that they definitely did the best that they could. But unfortunately, I did have some pretty extreme childhood trauma when I was really young. I think I was maybe around 4 years old, but there was like some abuse from someone outside my family.
Hmm.
Um, so I don't like I was so young that it's not something I have even like really clear memories of, but I know it did affect me throughout my childhood and affected my perception of being a girl. And so
Hmm.
it was pretty early that I started to develop what they call now as gender dysphoria, where I felt like I was meant to be born a boy. I would be happier if I was a boy. I also felt like boys just had almost like more freedom. And just,
Hmm.
I felt like my personality would fit better if I was born a boy. So that started pretty early, like maybe around 5-ish years old. And, um, I kind of, sometimes I would ask my mom to go to school kind of dressed as it wasn't dressed as a boy necessarily, but as kind of like a male character that I gravitated towards.
Hmm.
Like Robin Hood was one, and there were, it's embarrassing, but there were just various characters over the years that I sort of like modeled myself after. But it wasn't until I was 13 years old that I learned about gender ideology. So I'm 33 years old now. So, and I was born in 1991. So I was a little bit ahead of like where things are now with the gender stuff just being ubiquitous. But I started to get really into anime and certain fandoms when I was like 12, 13. And so one day I was just kind of searching the internet. I don't really even remember what I was looking at, but it was something related to, my interests at the time. And I just sort of stumbled across this website of people who were born female but identified as male, and they were talking about, fully transitioning to male. And at the time, my brain didn't really comprehend the reality of that or like the consequences of that. But, I basically believed that you could change genders or basically change sex with the surgeries and hormones that were available. And so, prior to that, like I definitely had the thought, I wish I was a boy a lot, but it wasn't something that I could actually pursue. It was just like, oh, it's a bummer that I'm not a boy. But after I discovered this website, and I was definitely reading stuff that was geared towards adults and, sexual stuff. And it was not appropriate for someone, for an adolescent or young adolescent, especially. And my brain just didn't, it wasn't possible for me to even fully understand like what was going on. And so there's definitely been times that I was just like, I wish I never discovered that at all and what my story would look like. But anyway, I did. And from that point on, I kind of started identifying as a boy, or I thought later in life I would become a man. So I did tell my parents at that point, but they didn't get it. Like I mean, it's pretty hard to get, if you're not actually the person experiencing it, but I mean, puberty blockers and gender affirmation and all of that, like doctors affirming people's genders, that wasn't a thing back then, especially not for kids. And so I didn't know anyone trans in real life. It wasn't like a culture at my school or anything. I was more of an outlier, I felt, because I was that way. So I kind of stayed closeted for the most part, apart from there were times that I cut my hair off and I would wear like a chest binder. And another way that I dealt with it was I developed an eating disorder, and I was like restricting my food intake and purging after meals in order to not develop like to stop my developing female body shape, basically. And so that was kind of how I dealt with it for a lot of years. Finally, when I was 17 years old, I had told my parents I was still struggling with this, and they found the name of a therapist who supposedly specialized in gender issues. So they took me to him, and I think they were expecting him to like actually help me work through it and be like, okay, where are these feelings actually coming from? And I think that their goal was that he would help me accept my biological sex. And I only saw him for 3 sessions, but by the end of the third session, he was already like, okay, man, I know you're a guy. Let's move forward with this. If you're ready, I can, tell your parents you're ready to start testosterone. He like invited my parents in on, I think it was the third session, and basically told them that he had been affirming me and that he thought basically, she's right. She's a boy trapped in a girl's body. Of course, he was using male pronouns, he and him for me at the time. But my parents were just like shocked. And like I live in a really small town. So we were actually driving an hour to Sacramento to see this person, which was like the nearest big city. And so after that, they basically just didn't take me back to him. I think that they didn't think he was a good influence because I was like just learning to drive at that point, and I was very close to my parents, and I felt like I kind of needed that family support to like move forward. Kind of put the brakes on transitioning for a long time. And there were a few times I kind of like dabbled in it between like 17 and age 28. I would experiment with like my name and pronouns again, or like come out to certain friends. But I really didn't officially start transitioning until I'm 28 years old. And so at that point, I think what inspired me was, so the climate had shifted, like the political climate and the ideology that was being taught in colleges.
Mm-hmm.
So I was going to college for my science degree, but for like elective classes and things like that, I took feminist studies. Actually, it wasn't even called feminist studies. So they had switched it. It used to be called feminist studies or women's studies, and then they changed it to gender studies. And so that was one class that I took. And also just, you were seeing a lot more trans people on campus. You were seeing, pride flags everywhere and just more of a culture of affirmation and just everything. Like the media around it was changing. And so, but what was really the trigger for me in addition to that is I went through like a pretty traumatic breakup and, I had struggled with some other things over the years, alcohol and drug issues and just an unhealthy relationship. And so after that relationship broke off, I was like, okay, I'm gonna get myself healthy and I'm gonna heal from these issues. But I believe the reason that I had been unable to heal and accept myself as a woman was because and this is what I learned from the website when I was 13, right? Is that if you were trans, like if you were born in the wrong body and you didn't transition, then you were basically doomed to never be your real self. You would never find true happiness. And so I didn't think I could be happy as a woman. And so to me at the time, I thought transition was like going to heal me. And
Okay.
um, so yeah, that's kind of the first part of my story. So I guess I'll pause there.
No, no, that's interesting. So it was, it was almost like there was that cultural movement and you felt more support from outside of your family before you took it. And what was the medication like that you were taking?
Yeah. So when I decided, okay, I'm going to take the medical route, I called up Planned Parenthood
Hmm.
because I'd been looking into how you could get hormones. I think I actually talked to my doctor at the time first, just like my GP, and I asked him, do you know anything about this? Can you prescribe me hormones? He said, I don't really have any experience in that area, but we might be able to refer you to someone who does. But then I looked at Planned Parenthood and, found that you didn't even have to have like a real doctor's appointment before going in there. And, but I did think that I would be possibly evaluated or that there would at least be like some kind of somewhat lengthy process to getting the hormones. And so it was during the lockdowns at this point. So this was 2020. And to my surprise, when I called Planned Parenthood, they did not ask me to schedule in person. They were just like, yeah, we're not having as many in person appointments because of COVID. So we'll just have a doctor call you back. And so I think a doctor called me back or a nurse practitioner called me back the next day. And we had about a 20 to 30 minute conversation. I don't feel like there was a ton of information given. Most of the information given was just about like, okay, you know that your voice will get deeper and you'll grow like body hair and basically start looking more like a man. And of course that's
Hmm.
what I wanted at the time, so I was just like, okay, great. The only thing that this person said, and I believe this person was trans identified themselves, the nurse practitioner, the only kind of like negative information or side effects that they really went over was like, oh, do you drink or smoke? And I said, no, I used to, but I don't anymore. And um they were just like, okay, great, because it can cause some problems like with the heart if you're also drinking and smoking at the same time, as if like it's not a risk normally, which later I learned that it definitely is. Your heart attack risk goes up. I think it's something like 4 times, at least 4 times if you're a female taking testosterone, because it thickens the blood vessels and um, it affects your blood volume and all kinds of just things that aren't naturally meant to happen to your body. So,
Hmm.
but I didn't know this at the time. And like a medical professional was telling me that she seemed to think it was relatively safe. So, um, and then I think that they briefly asked about like mental health issues, and I basically said, yeah, I have mental health issues, but it's because I'm trans and I haven't transitioned, and they didn't really push back on that. They just accepted that at face value because that's kind of the narrative, and
Hmm.
then I was actually prescribed over the phone. And she just said, okay, your prescription will be ready at your pharmacy, and we recommend getting labs, but you don't need to get labs to start. So I didn't end up getting any blood work done until I think at least a couple months after I started taking testosterone. And it was also like, they give you it's a liquid that you inject. And so, I'd never like injected anything before, and they just sent me syringes and the little vial of testosterone to the pharmacy, and I had to figure it out, from the written instructions. And I was like, the first time I did it, I was just like shaking. I was so scared.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was just like, even at the time, I was like happy about it. I was like, okay, this is my next step. Like, I'm going to become who I always felt I was meant to be. But even that, I was like, shouldn't they be like doing this for me the first time and like actually making sure that I'm doing it safely? And so, yeah, it was just really strange. I thought being prescribed so quickly was very strange too, even at the
Hmm.
time.
Hmm.
But yeah, so that was around June of 2020, something like that. And I was just injecting once a week, and they had told me to start at a certain amount and increase my dose slightly. I think it was every week or every 2 weeks. And so I was doing that. And yeah, at first I didn't really have any side effects for maybe the first month or so, but then I did start to have side effects pretty quickly.
Hmm. And what were some of your side effects? Did you want to share any of those?
Definitely. I think it's really important for people to know, because, unfortunately, it should be the doctors that are warning you about this. But sadly, I learned that other people experience these side effects from the internet, like after already having them, from other detransitioners mostly. But um, I had the first thing I noticed was kind of edema, which is like body swelling and fluid retention, sort of. I felt very puffy, and I started to gain weight really quickly. And I'm sure like some of it was muscle, but it was pretty much the quickest I've ever gained weight in my life. And, I was eating like fairly healthy, and I just felt very like puffy and bloated all the time. And, um, I didn't really think that that made me look more masculine. It just looked strange, and it wasn't something that I liked, but I was like, okay, I'm going to stay on it and see what happens. Because again, I was like, I believe that this was really going to help me. So I didn't want to just reject it, because of side effect. And then I kind of started to have some nausea that was unusual for me, especially when I would eat like fatty foods and things like that. I just started to get nauseous more and more. And my emotions were more unstable as well, in terms of I feel like I was more irritable and
Hmm.
quicker to anger. That started to develop over time, especially as I increased the dose. But the most radical side effect that had like the biggest impact on me was so I didn't really know what would happen with my voice, because I was a professional singer myself at this point, prior to transitioning just locally. But, that was a big part of my life, and my voice was important to me. And I did understand that my voice would get deeper and it would probably be an adjustment. But the voice change happened like very quickly, way more quickly than I was expecting. So within a couple months, I had gone from like a soprano to almost a tenor. Like, so I had dropped like two whole vocal levels, like in a very short amount of
Hmm.
time. But at that point, I was still happy with the changes. I was like, okay, I was still able to sing. It was just in like a lower range. And I still felt like all my voice was there. It was just like shifted down a little bit. And then I just did like, I was getting a little bit concerned about how fast it was changing. And I just did like one more shot. I was about to go visit a friend in another state, and I did the shot right before I left, and something just, this voice in my head told me that was a really bad idea. Like, you shouldn't have done that. And sure enough, on the trip, my voice suddenly became super unstable, and like the whole, probably like top half of my voice, I couldn't access like any notes up there at all. And yeah, it was just gone. It was just air and squeaks would come out when I tried to go above like a certain note, which was actually very low. And also, in addition to like the changes to my singing, it was my speech was affected. Like my throat started to get very tired and like very sore.
Hmm.
Um, Even for just talking for a short amount of time, it was just very uncomfortable, and I lost all my volume. Like if, I went to like a couple social gatherings, when I was visiting my friend, and where I had to project over music, and it was like so painful, and like nobody could hear me. I started to feel like I had a vocal disability, and I was a singer before, so it's like I had a loud voice and could easily project, and like that was gone. And I just started to freak out. Like I was like, wait a minute, like, am I gonna regain this functionality back? Is it always going to be really painful like this? And um, so I just, I was with my friend who was trans, and I was kind of sharing some of my concerns with them. And um, I ultimately ended up deciding to go off of the testosterone. I still identified as I'll say, well, I identified as trans, and then I ended up switching to non-binary after going off the testosterone. But I still fully, believed in the central dogma of gender ideology for, months, probably 6 months after that. But I also I'd been talking to a surgeon about getting a double mastectomy, and thankfully I ended up canceling that, or postponing it at the time, because I was just like, you know what, like I thought I would be really happy with the changes from testosterone, and like I'm not. I don't know if this was a good choice. I don't want to do anything else permanent right now, just seeing the outcome of this. And so basically, so that was around October, November 2020. So I was only on the hormones really for a few months, but
Hmm.
that's what makes it so incredible, like how quickly my voice changed. And just, and I still have throat pain to this day. It has improved like over the years, but it's not like something that just went away when I went off of the testosterone. And this is something I heard from other detransitioners as well. They've talked about, a sore throat, and like not being able to scream, not being able to sing high. So actually, like if they're in danger, they can't even raise their voice to like protect themselves. And thankfully, I have gotten some of my upper register back. I think because I wasn't on it very long, but there is definitely still some disability there, and just functionality that I've lost.
Yeah. Jeez. Oh, yeah, I was going to say, do you have friends that were on it much longer that have detransitioned that have, I guess, long-term disabilities from it?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm sure she wouldn't mind me mentioning her, but Prisha Mosley she's a friend of mine who's a detransitioner. She's doing a lot of activism like herself. But yeah, she constantly talks about the voice changes and like the voice pain. And I think she was on testosterone for at least a couple of years. Um, and some people anecdotally have said that their voice did improve after being on testosterone for longer, but others have said the opposite. And so it's really, this isn't being studied. Like we don't have any real research on these things, and we're just kind of told that it's safe, and like and that it, will improve your mental health, and that it's like no big deal. Everybody has estrogen and testosterone, but it's all about the levels and giving your body something that it's not built for. That raises a lot of concerns. But there has been some limited research on the effects on singers of testosterone as well. You know, my theory is that people that start taking testosterone like a little bit, because it's kind of like the growth plates of like your bones, where your bones can like thicken, and you can obviously gain weight after a certain age, but you won't actually grow taller after like a certain, because your growth plates have closed. And with female vocal anatomy, um so when like a teenage boy is going through puberty, everything's kind of expanding, like their whole body's expanding, their lungs are expanding, um their voice is kind of shifting into what it would be as like an adult man. And but if you're like an adult woman that's your voice box is already developed basically, it's not going to have the same effect as a little boy who's like 13, 14, experiencing higher testosterone for the first time. And so that, I think that could have something to do with it. I was in my late 20s. Um, but yeah, and if you listen to a lot of uh, trans identifying females that have been on testosterone a long time, you do kind of notice sometimes their voice has this like common quality. It's kind of a little bit raspy, and almost like they smoke cigarettes or something. And that's what I noticed was beginning to happen with my voice.
Yeah. Mm. So, what are your thoughts on young children transitioning?
Yeah. So I want to start with, I think that the root of the problem is the gender affirming care. Like the affirmation is kind of the root of the problem, right? And that's kind of what happened to me when I first stumbled across this website, right? Like I had uncomfortable feelings with my body and my gender, but when that was actually affirmed and other people were saying that, if you think you're a man, then you're a man, and it's you have gender identity disorder, which it was called back then. And so basically you are a man in a woman's body, and the only treatment for that is to move forward with transition and take hormones. The only effective treatment, I guess. And so it starts in the schools, it starts in our culture, it starts when the kid goes to a therapist or a doctor, that they're affirming them. And so even before like the whole medical transition part of it, or social transition, like that's where it begins, is kind of like planting that seed of, you could be born in the wrong body. You could be, have a male brain and a female body, or you're non-binary. And so that is the danger, is that kids are just going to accept that and believe that it's fact. And that's how it's being taught. And so after that fact is accepted, that is what creates the desire and the push to transition, because doctors and therapists and society it's not offering any alternatives to
Hmm.
these people, or really honestly showcasing the risks and reality of what that path entails.
Hmm.
And so I mean, I think kids transitioning is wrong. Obviously, to be honest, I don't think the medical interventions are safe in any case, even adults. I don't think it's very experimental,
Yeah.
um, no matter what age you're starting it. But I do think that the age where there was, where no one was doing this as children, and where it was gate kept a
Yeah.
lot more, and the person, had to live for a couple of years or a year or something like that as the opposite sex.
Hmm.
I do think that's problematic in its own way, but I do also believe that it prevented probably 80 to 90% of the transitions that are
Yeah.
happening today, because
Yeah.
puberty blockers weren't a thing back then. And, you couldn't just call up a Planned Parenthood and get hormones in one day.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So
yeah, I think, sorry, go ahead.
no, no, no. I was just going to say those are some excellent points that you're making about age and consent and those sorts of things. So I know you do a fair bit of public speaking. So whenever you do that, what is the main point of your story, out of everything that you went through, that you always want to make sure that you get out there, that if if someone listened to one part of this video today, what's that main part that you hope that they would hear?
I wanted to put my story out there because I wish that someone like me had been public when I was 13 years old. I wish that there had been more information about the vocal effects and singing and, just the side effects that I experienced in general. I wish that there had been more people that were public with it back then. And I'm so grateful to all the other detransitioners who have shared their stories too. Like there were a few back then when I was transitioning, but it's absolutely exploded the number of people speaking out about this since then. And so, and I have had the opportunity to talk to people who are considering transition as well and share my experience as well as what I've learned from really, digging into what the research says about this. Um, and even if that person takes what I say and does go on to transition anyway, at least I know that I've said my piece and that I gave them the information because I do feel like I didn't have the information in a lot of ways. But also, I want to give people hope who have detransitioned because, you know, um, like I have recovered in a lot of ways. I've
Yeah.
found love. In some ways I've found my voice through sharing my story and working with Transition Justice, which is a nonprofit that I work with, helping detransitioners. And so, so yeah, those are the two main reasons.
Those are big. Those are big. And what is life like for you now then? How much, if you could see yourself now versus 5 years ago, what would you say to yourself?
I think I would be proud of myself in a lot of ways. Not that my life is perfect now. I'm still like basically when I met my husband, I met him in 2021, but we kind of started dating in 2023 and then we got married last year in 2024. Being in a relationship, being married, like it can uncover so many parts of yourself that like still need to heal. And transition was very much a band-aid cure for me. Like it didn't actually address any of my underlying issues, but definitely like, being in a marriage and learning to love and live with another person, and you both have your, respective like traumas and triggers and stuff. I've learned a lot about myself through that. And so I think I have done like a ton more healing than I have
Yeah.
5 years ago. And I'm definitely
Yeah.
seeing how like some of my history and mental health issues contributed to me identifying as trans and just the black and white thinking that I had and coping mechanisms and just everything. I'm seeing it kind of from I guess like a bird's eye view now. Like I'm
Yeah.
seeing more of the big picture than I was 5 years ago.
Yeah. Oh, that's huge. Any last thoughts or anything, Kat, that you want to add?
Well, just thank you for having me, Laura. And I, and thank you for, not shying away from like platforming this conversation because um, there's a lot going on in the world right now, but this is a really widespread and important issue. And I think that, diverse opinions need to be heard. So, yeah, just thank you for having me and for listening to my story.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a pleasure having you. And thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
Of course.
Take care.
You too.